Morning, church. How we doing this morning? I want to thank you for showing up for church. I didn't expect anybody to really be here. I'm glad you're here, though. Pastor Dan and I were just talking, and usually it's Jersey. I mean, summertime, and this is the kickoff of our official summer. It's not officially summer, but really it starts now. It's up and down, attendance, up and down, up at the Poconos and down at the shore. And so thanks for coming. I appreciate it. I didn't expect, like I said, a whole lot of people to be here because it's a beautiful weekend too. So although I'm a guest speaker, I consider this my home church. We kind of moved to help mom and dad, and dad just passed in July. So we're coming up on a year, and since we moved here, this has been what I consider my home church at this point. So I feel extremely privileged to be able to share from the pulpit, which I never expected to be able to do. So I was talking to Dan a couple of weeks ago, actually not very long ago, and I'm like, bro, I got a message that really dovetails nicely into from the last series that he just finished, and I'm like, it's pretty cool to see how it's connected. And then I went to my district. I'm an Assemblies of God pastor, and our ordination services, they do religious stuff, blah. And I'm not really into that kind of stuff, but they were honoring me for 25 years of being ordained, and okay, I'll go, but I'm kind of looking for jobs. So I wasn't going to go, but my daughter was like, you really should go, and my wife, of course, was like, you need to go. We're looking for a church to do ministry, because right now I'm doing construction and my body's getting old. So I'm feeling it. So we went, and the guy that spoke literally did this sermon, pretty much almost word for word. I'm like, it's what the Holy Spirit's saying to the church. So I'm like, that's when I called Pastor Dan, and he's like, yeah, how about next Sunday? I'm like, what? He goes, yeah, it's in between series. I'm like, okay. So here we are. I have a big confession that I need to make. I am a huge fan of The Princess Bride. Do you guys know that show? It's a movie. Okay, I feel a little bit better. I know it's kind of inconceivable that someone as cool as I would like a film like that, but nevertheless, it is true. And what's my favorite line, you ask? I'm glad you asked. And it is not inconceivable, although that is a fun line of mine. But my favorite line is, you keep using that word, and it is inconceivable, the word. But I do not think it means what you think it means. And those of you who remember that movie, he keeps using the Sicilian guy, the Italian little short guy, who I kind of relate to, being bald and short. He was using this word all the time, and I was a youth pastor for a very long time, and vernacular changes so quickly. I mean, you couldn't say certain words. When I first started, the word fat was like a big word. Like, oh, dude, that's fat, yo. And that's fat? Oh, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? At one point, I had to get kids or some of my leaders. I'm like, bro, what is this text that I got? It's all these slangs, and I had one of my student leaders help me. She gave me a cheat sheet for all the what this means. IDK means I don't know, or I don't care. I don't even remember it now, but that's how quickly it changes. And in the church, we use all these church words, Christianese words, and sometimes we don't even know what those words mean. And so I want to talk about the word disciple, because we throw around the word disciple all the time. And even Christian, we throw around Christian. In America, we're a Christian nation. We're supposed to be a Christian nation. We're actually a post-Christian nation at this point. But context is so important. And that idea of go into all the world and preach the gospel and make disciples of all nations. What does that really mean? So original context, what is the context that they say disciple in? And context is king. It's really, really important that we understand the word meaning not just of the author who was saying it or the speaker who was saying it, but also in the context of the hearer. Because I can say something, just like the word fat or drip if you're a young person. Some of you actually know what that means. And you have young kids, right? So what does that mean to you? Because it might mean something different to me. Now, in Jesus' original context, we see in Matthew 28:18. I want to just quickly go through and briefly, and we'll talk about the context because it's real important context. Jesus said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And surely I am with you even to the very ends of the age." So let's break that down. Who is the them that he's talking about? Well, that would be us, the church, his disciples. This is post-resurrection, but pre-ascension. And he's commissioning, he's telling the church that we're following him and made it through the turmoil of him being crucified. And they're sticking with him. And so he's sending them, he says, all authority is them. They are the church, right? And then he goes on to say, all authority has been given to me. That means if he has all authority, then somebody has no authority. Satan. Now that'll preach, but I'm not really much of a preacher. I'm more of a teacher, so I'll leave that for somebody else. But he's commissioning his church, the disciples, to go. And in the commissioning, we have his authority, as long as we're doing what he told us to do. And what did he tell us to do? Go make disciples. He did not say, go make church people. He did not say, make religious people. He said, go make disciples. Essentially, a disciple is a learner. And more, that's kind of the key thing, and we'll talk more about that. And he said, this is kind of blows my mind. Of all nations, make disciples of all nations. Now, we live in America, in the church in America, and the church in America, as a youth pastor, I know because I kept hearing all these people say, we're having a hard time keeping our kids in church. Well, Jesus told us to go make disciples of all nations, and we're having a hard time keeping our kids in church. What's the problem here? I think the problem is we're making a bunch of church people, a bunch of religious people, a bunch of quote-unquote Christians who really aren't disciples. And so let's figure out what this disciple thing is all about. A few years ago, I started using the word Christ follower because it kind of felt a little bit more synergistic with what the scriptures teach and show about what a disciple is actually all about. So many of my generation, I'm an Xer, a Gen Xer, they left the church. And I've been ministering in churches for 35, 40 years alone because my generation kind of left the church. I've been a very lonely person. I've either had to find my friendships with younger people or older people. And I tend to slide with the younger people just because I worked with youth for so long. But I think that's because the religious thing that was happening was happening in the church. And, so Christianity and religion always, well, not true Christianity, but if it's just religious, it just leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. It's not authentic. And so we've seen a big resurgence, and that's, really a big topic that we just got done talking about in the series that Pastor Dan has been mentioning. So if we're going to deconstruct some stuff, let's deconstruct some of the religious stuff, all the things that we do, and not religion like James talks about religion in the book of James, but religion just superficial stuff that we do that we really don't have any reason for doing it. Oh, we always do one song and then this, and then we kneel and then we stand. That's religious. Nothing wrong with it, but it's not really connected to our following of Christ. It's irrelevant. And we connect with it sometimes. Stained glass windows, that seems very religious, but they're beautiful. So there's nothing wrong with them. They speak to the glory and majesty of of a lot of things, and some of them have a story to even tell. So there's a lot of wonderful things about tradition and things, but there's also some stuff that just sidetracks people, and gets it off of the real important. So back to our original context. And it's the Hebrew context. It's the Jewish guys that hung out with Jesus. So what was their context? What did discipleship mean in their context? Now, originally and even now, the Hebrew culture, Jewish people, some very wonderful things about their culture that I want to bring out and I want to talk about. Mothers would whisper into their babies' ears scriptures, just getting them involved in understanding and knowing about God. They don't even know how to speak. They don't know what they're hearing, what they're saying, but they'd whisper so that they would get to know a little bit about God and accustomed to hearing the word. Biblical education, high priority, very high on the list. I mean, it was a part of everything that they did. Their whole culture, their whole life was revolved around that. And the rabbi held the biggest, the highest position in the culture, and keep in mind, it was clans. It was like a small town, like everybody knows everybody. And the rabbi was he was the man. And so everybody wanted to do that, and they respected and revered him above everybody. As a matter of fact, even from a very young age, the young boys would go to rabbi school. They'd start in school. That was their education. That was the foundation of education for everything. And it revolved around the scriptures. And it revolved around being taught by the rabbi, the local rabbi. And if they didn't have a local rabbi, they would borrow another town's rabbi. So they started out, and the religious education for really everybody, and then for the rabbis started, and it had three separate phases. You don't really need to memorize any of these kinds of things, but it's good to know for context. All right, so we have three different stages of the education system. The first was Bet Safar. Now, these were all students from about 6 to 10. They would go to this school, and that was like their grammar school into kind of, I guess, high school-ish. And they would go and be taught by their rabbi. And the Torah was at the very center of their educational system. The Torah means teachings or instructions, or simply known as the way. The way. That sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? The way. Jesus said it, right? What did he say? I am the way. I am the Torah. I am the law. I am the way, the truth, and the life. All right? And in this stage, they would memorize the Torah. Memorize the Torah. This is hysterical for me because I can remember the first thing I actually memorized that was significant, except for the locker key, but I forgot my locker combo more times than I remembered it. But I was in high school, or in college, when I finally memorized my social security number. I felt proud. I remembered that number. These kids, 10 years old, have memorized the Torah. Now, what's the Torah? The Torah is the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of what we call the Old Testament. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. 5 books. They memorized it, for the most part. That blows my mind, a 10-year-old memorizing that. But for most students, that's kind of as far as they would go. They would start picking up the family trade, whether they would be a fisherman or a farmer or a shepherd. That would be their next phase because they had to live life, and But the best of those students, they would go on to the second phase. Bet Talmud that's what that's called, and that took students from about 10 to about 14, 15 years old. So it's like what we would consider like high schoolish, and that was more like that'd be more like college-ish, kind of a comparable for us. And these students then would continue on in their education, and they would memorize the rest of the Old Testament. It would seem appropriate, right? Just since you're on the whole thing of memorizing. That's the rest of the Old Testament. Now, that's not the New Testament, but the Old Testament. And can you imagine memorizing numbers? And then you got all the prophets, and it's like incredible. So these are not stupid kids. So most of the remaining students, but they would stop after that. I mean, that's the overwhelming majority. They wouldn't continue on to that. But the best of the best of the best, they'd They were looking for that brass ring. They wanted to get to be a rabbi because he was the man. And the rabbi, quite honestly, they made a lot of money. They were respected and honored, and they received financial blessings with that. And that next phase is called Bet Midrash. And in this phase, it's a little bit different now. They would have to go to a rabbi of their choosing. And their education system was a little bit different. The highest, I guess, the most important thing for them is if they would sit around, like the best day for them would be if they sat around and talked about God all day. They just, if we talked about God all day, we had like the best day. The best day. And so their education system was about questions and questioning, not about like memorizing answers. Like in America, if you're memorizing what the teacher wants you to know for the test, right? That's how I made it through college. Just make sure I know what that professor wants. And every professor is different. One professor is like, it's all about the notes. The other professor, it's all about the reading. And then, sometimes they didn't match. So you had to find out what do you want, bro? Like, which one do you want? Well, these guys, it was all about just understanding and questioning and then, so that's their context. And so they would have to now look for their rabbis, and they would go to the rabbis, and the rabbis that they liked, the one that they kind of connected to. And certain rabbis had, if you were really good, they had a yoke. Like they tend, they're not a yolk like you put around, and not an egg yolk. A yolk, in this context, not either one of those, talking about words that don't mean the same thing. But their yoke, a rabbi's yoke, is their set of teachings. Now, if they had to be distinguished rabbi to have their own yoke. Otherwise, they would just say, well, I don't have my own teachings, but I follow Gamaliel or Hillel. Those are two of Jesus' days, the two of the profound rabbis in the area that actually had their own yoke. So there were, and certain places they would differ on, mostly, I know specifically for marriage and remarriage and divorce and that kind of a thing. So they were uniquely different in that understanding. So every rabbi would be a little bit different, but the student, he's wanting to be a disciple. He wants to continue on in his education. He would go to that rabbi, and he would say, I want to be your disciple. And so that rabbi now, he's like, okay, let's start. Let's see what you got. And so they'd start asking questions. And they'd go back and forth. And becoming a disciple of a rabbi is a term for this intense education and mentorship program. If for a rabbi, he's thinking a disciple is someone who wants to be just like me or just like their rabbi. They want to learn to do what the rabbi does. Not just know what the rabbi knows, but do what he does. He does things a little bit differently. Now, when they would ask the rabbi to be their disciples, he would turn to them and he'd begin to grill them with questions. And their responses and their questions would give the rabbi some understanding as to where that student was, where they were. And it was very intense. And there's a very good chance that what Jesus was doing at the temple, do you remember when he was left in Jerusalem and the whole clan, his whole family clan left, and they were going back to, he gets stuck back, and then a couple days later, like, yo, where's Jesus? And he's got to be with the cousins, but he's not. He's back in Jerusalem, and he's doing what? He's talking with the rabbis, right? And what are they doing? They're asking questions. And what's he doing? He's asking questions, and they're like, that's probably what was happening right here. He's probably looking for rabbiship, that next level, because he was about that age. And they were profoundly blown away by Jesus. And so this process of rabbiship, that's the ultimate goal. So the rabbi's thinking, can this dude be just like me? That's the thought in the rabbi's mind. But if he doesn't think, now as the rabbi, he's looking at this young boy and he's like, he's a smart kid, but I don't think he has it. He would say, to the student, he would say, you are obviously you love God. Obviously, you're a very smart student. But, I believe that you should continue your education. I think you should continue going back and plying your family trade. Go back to fishing, or, you just, I don't think you quite have what it takes to be just like me. But if he thought that this kid was it, man. I mean, he could be like me. He could do it. He would say something like this: "Come, follow me." Sound familiar? Jesus said that to 12 guys. Very familiar. Now, there's one significant difference between what they did and what Jesus did. The disciples went to the rabbi. This rabbi, Jesus, went to the disciples. And that means that a couple things. Context. Peter's fishing. That means he's a dropout. He's a loser. He's moved on. He's going back and he's plying a trade. And so are every other one of the disciples. They didn't make it. They are not the best of the best. They're fishing. They're doing taxes. They're doing whatever, So they're kind of like me. They couldn't make it to master's degrees. They couldn't get their doctorate. They're like, I'm just going to fish. It's all good. But Jesus is like, you can be like me. Come on, follow me. And all of a sudden you see these guys like, okay, they drop their nets. Like, this is how they made their living. Like, if I drop my nets, if I drop my hammer, I don't eat. But the rabbi, he makes a lot of money. So if the rabbi thinks you can be just like me, he's going to do it. Kind of puts a different spin on now. All of a sudden, why did Peter leave the family business? All right. The ancient rabbis and the sages had this saying amongst themselves. It went something like this: "May you be covered in the dust of your master." And this scenario kind of took place all over the place. The rabbi would have a bunch of young people follow him. They were his disciples. And dusty roads, you see him and a bunch of little boys following behind. And the idea of this is, metaphorically speaking, if you follow your leader so close that your proximity that you get dust on you. Now, obviously, it's not about the dust per se. It's about trying to live your life exactly so closely to your master that you look and smell and act just like your master. Covered in the dust of your master, and their philosophy of teaching and their philosophy of life. And that's what discipleship looked like. And everyone had seen that scenario, and it was such a huge badge of honor for the crew, for the little students, to be doing that. As soon as they heard those words, "Follow me," they dropped everything. Whatever they were doing. And that's why you saw Peter and all those guys just drop whatever they were doing. And they're like, "We got the call. We got the nod. We're in the big leagues now. This is awesome." And you couldn't quite figure that out. All of a sudden, now you know why they did that. They devote their whole entire life from that moment on to be just like their rabbi. That's their goal in life now. I want to be just like him. This is my goal. And they left their family, they left their friends, they left their community, their synagogue, everything. Everything of their old life, it's old. And now I have a new life, and it's to become like my master. Sheds a whole lot of light on what we see the disciples doing. Now that's the context of that, of their life. In the Old Testament and the New Testament, that was probably more of a intertestamental and New Testament thing for the rabbis in the Jewish culture, because things were a little different in the post-dead space in intertestamental period. I don't want to get too much into that, but that's what it meant for Jesus' day. And some will say, well, that's good for them and then, but this is us and this is now. And my question is to that, Francis Chan always says this, like, you look at the Bible and you try to pull out principles from the Bible, and not everything's going to be exactly like that because of our culture and our context, but you pull out principles. The truth principles are true no matter where you put that truth principle. You could put it in ancient Rome, or you could put it in, metropolitan New York in 2024. It's the same truth principle. It doesn't change, right? So we, through context, extract the principles and we apply them to our lives. So what's this discipleship process? What should it look like now, here and now? What does it look like to be a disciple of Jesus in 2024? Because today he's still doing the same thing. He's still reaching out and he's calling disciples. And he's called everyone. And it's not like just the best of the bests. He's not. As a matter of fact, in a lot of cases, it's almost the worst. I mean, I've seen God he can use everybody, and he can use anybody. But it usually has to do with you. Sometimes he'll use you in spite of you. A lot of times. But some of the worst get used powerfully because they realize it's really not about them. And it's okay. It's actually it's a little bit more synergistic what we see happening in the scriptures. And to those true Christianity and discipleship is a journey. It's a long journey, and sometimes it's slow and sometimes it's winding, but it's about figuring out how to be more like Jesus, hanging out with Jesus. That's like when we spend time in worship, hanging out with Jesus. It's not about singing songs, not at all. It's about being in his presence. Come into his presence and he changes you. He transforms you. And the work of the Holy Spirit in our lives helps doing that too. So what does that look like? It means when we get together at our houses and we fellowship, some of God in you rubs off on me, and some of God in me rubs off on you. And that can happen anywhere and everywhere. As a youth pastor, I used to take kids fishing. I'd take them on camping trips. I'd take them on creation. We'd go see concerts. Oh, I don't need to hear another concert. I've been to a million. But you know why I did that? Because that's where real life happens. And Jesus spent 3 years, 24/7, with 12 guys. And they changed the world because they lived with him. They hung out with him. That's what discipleship looks like. It's about a process of being transformed into the image of your rabbi. And sometimes we all have a little bit of Jesus in us. And we all can share that. And to those who choose to respond to Jesus and the faith that Jesus has in you, that's the other thing. Why did Peter step out of the boat? Do you remember that scenario? Why in the world? What possesses someone he's not sure that he's talking to Jesus? It could be a ghost. Remember? He says, it might be a ghost. I'm not sure. Jesus, if it's you, call me out on the water. Like, that's crazy talk. But he knew the master's voice because he had been with Jesus. And he's like, he said my name. He knows me. I know his voice. So Peter steps out of the boat, and he's the only other person that we know of in the world that's walked on water besides Jesus. Peter. And then Jesus turns around. I just changed his pedal. Just changed his page. and then Jesus turns around and said, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Now, I don't know about you, but I kind of like, bro, he didn't really doubt. Like, he stepped out of the water. He believed. Didn't he believe in Jesus? When Jesus said do it, he did it. I don't think Jesus was talking about his faith in him. Peter was addressing Peter's issue. Peter's issue was he didn't have faith in himself. Because Peter kept thinking, yeah, I'm a screw up. I'm just a fisherman. See, I have faith in you. Did I not call you? Did I not say you can be just like me? And that's why Peter's like, yeah, I can be like you. I think I can be like you. I don't think I can be like you. And he starts going down. His faith in himself was the problem, not his faith in Jesus, I believe. And Jesus is still doing the same thing. He comes, he saves us, he picks us up, And later on, we see a incredible change. We see Peter, he swings for the fence every time. So sometimes he hits a home run, and other times he whiffs. But later on, the day of Pentecost, he hits it out of the park. And he consistently, after the Holy Spirit comes and begins to work in his life a little bit more consistently, you see him, the consistency in his life begins to change and transform. And he's a little bit more consistent with his faith in himself and in what God has for him. And I think if you're anything like me, you might be you might feel like Peter. Like, I'm not the best of the best. But Jesus doesn't really care about that. He says, I'm putting my Holy Spirit in you, and you can do and you can be just like me. And he's still saying that, and he's still doing that. So the question now stands, are you a Christ follower? Are you a disciple of Christ? I believe that you can do what Jesus can do. And then, are you the one that dropped everything? Did you leave everything to drop and follow him? Did you metaphorically leave your family? Did you leave your trade? Metaphorically speaking. Because keep in mind, Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, Paul actually was probably a rabbi. And then got kicked out because he believed in Jesus. And then he was what? A tent maker. He went backwards. Really, I mean, in their social standing. He stepped down from he was no longer that guy, and he became a tent maker, but God powerfully used him. Just like God powerfully used Peter. Two opposite ends of the spectrum on a sociological scale. God's still calling everyone. He called everyone in this room, follow me. It's indiscriminative. Because it's not about what you can do, it's what about God can do in and through you using the presence and the power of the Holy Spirit. And this setting, this church setting, it's not a social club. We don't come here just so we do nice little things. Oh, we're going to do a nice little thing out in the park. We're going to do something for the community, a nice little thing, like the Rotary Club. No, it's not about that. It's about making disciples of all nations. How are we going to do that? How are you going to do that? And some of us, we strap on the carpenter's belt. Some of us, we're accountants. It doesn't matter what you do. It matters about as an occupation. Now, I have left. I've been all over the place. I'm now back home where I started. And it's a season. Who knows where I'll be next? But I'm no less of a disciple now. I'm right now, the person that I'm discipling is my boss, my supervisor. He's actually a Jewish man, and he doesn't have a faith in God. And he said a couple weeks ago, he's like, well, I don't really have a pastor, but if I had a pastor, you'd be the guy. And he just lost his wife to cancer, and been praying for him, praying for her. And I told him, and he comes to me, and we sit on the phone and we talk, and that's where God has me right now, and that's what we do, and that's what disciples do. It's not about being on stage. This is such a small part of all of this. It's not about being on the worship team. It's not being about preaching. It's not even being about Sunday school teachers, although they have or those kinds of things. It's about who you meet on a daily basis. And that's how we're going to impact the world in a massive, massive way. And that's how we're going to, come on, work with me. And so as the worship team comes back, I want to close with this one thing, these words of Paul in 1 Corinthians 11. Paul says it like this, follow me as I follow Christ. I mean, we're not all perfect, we're not, but are we trying to be more like Christ? We're in the process of being Christ-like. And, positionally, he has placed us there. He believes in us. He believes in you. You can do this. Together, we can help each other become more Christ-like. And Jesus is calling you and us today. Know that he has the faith in you, and whether you have the faith in you is really irrelevant. You can do it in spite of your thoughts, but you have to readjust your thoughts. And for some of us, I think we might have to do that. If we want revival to happen in our house, in our community, in our church, it's got to start with you. And a lot of us have to start by transforming our minds and thinking like God thinks about you. You have to think like God thinks, believes in you. And so Jesus is calling us today. He has faith in you. Know that you can be like him because of the Holy Spirit's work in your life. Let's sing this last song.